The call came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in March. I'll never forget that exact moment because it's when my entire world turned to ash, literally and figuratively. But what came after? The complete betrayal by my own flesh and blood. That's what really showed me the true nature of the people I had called family my entire life. Before that nightmare began, Sarah and I had built what I thought was an unshakable foundation in Portland, Oregon. We met during our residency at OHSU Hospital. She was pursuing pediatric medicine while I focused on emergency medicine. Sarah had this infectious laugh that could brighten the darkest shift, and eyes the color of spring rain that seemed to see straight through to people's souls. She was petite but fierce, with auburn hair that caught the light when she moved quickly through hospital corridors, always rushing to help another child in need. Our first meeting was hardly romantic. I was treating a 7-year-old boy who had fallen from his bicycle, and Sarah burst into my trauma bay demanding to know why pediatrics hadn't been called for a head injury. She stood there, all 5 feet 4 inches of her, hands on her hips, ready to fight me over proper protocol. I was simultaneously annoyed and attracted to her passion for protecting children. "Excuse me, doctor," she had said, reading my badge. "Dr. Martinez, this child needs a pediatric evaluation before you proceed." "The child has a simple laceration and mild concussion. I'm perfectly capable of treating both," I replied, trying to maintain professional dignity while noticing how her eyes blazed when she was angry. "Children aren't just small adults. They require specialized care." She was right, of course. And the way she advocated fiercely for that frightened child, holding his hand while I cleaned his wound, telling him stories about brave knights to distract him from the pain. That's when I fell in love with Sarah Thompson. After 5 years of dating through the chaos of medical training, we married in a small ceremony overlooking the Columbia River Gorge. Sarah wore her grandmother's pearls and a dress she had found at a vintage shop in Hawthorne. I still remember how she looked walking toward me that September morning, sunlight streaming through the trees, her face radiant with joy. My best man, fellow resident Dr. Marcus Chen, later told me he had never seen anyone look as happy as I did at that moment. Our first home was a charming 1920s craftsman in the Hawthorne district, complete with original hardwood floors that creaked in a comforting way, and a kitchen. Sarah immediately began planning to renovate. The house had character, built-in bookcases, a clawfoot bathtub, and a covered front porch where we spent summer evenings reading medical journals and planning our future. We spent weekends exploring Portland's food scene, hiking Mount Hood's trails, and hosting dinner parties for our medical school friends. Sarah had a gift for making people feel welcome. She could remember everyone's favorite foods, their pet peeves, their relationship dramas. Our dinner table became a gathering place for exhausted residents who needed good food and better company. Sarah specialized in treating children with chronic illnesses, while I found my calling in trauma surgery. Our schedules were demanding. I worked nights and weekends in the emergency department, while Sarah managed a complex caseload of young patients fighting cancer, genetic disorders, and other life-threatening conditions. We made it work by leaving each other silly notes in unexpected places, in medicine bottles tucked into stethoscope cases, taped to coffee makers. Sarah's notes were always illustrated with little drawings of hearts, flowers, or cartoon versions of us in scrubs. We talked about having children constantly. Sarah would light up when discussing the family we would build together, planning elaborate bedtime stories and weekend adventures. "I want to teach them to love learning," she would say, "and to always stand up for people who can't protect themselves." 3 years into our marriage, Sarah surprised me with news that would complete our picture-perfect life. I had just finished a brutal 24-hour shift and collapsed into bed when she woke me with coffee and a small wrapped box. "David," she said, her voice trembling with excitement, "I have something to show you." Inside the box was a positive pregnancy test and a tiny pair of baby shoes with a note, "Size, coming February. Parents, us, status, over the moon." I held her and cried, actual tears of joy, something I hadn't experienced since our wedding day. We spent the next few hours planning the nursery, debating names and imagining teaching our child to love the Pacific Northwest as much as we did. Sarah painted watercolor landscapes of Oregon's coastline to hang above the crib, each one more beautiful than the last. We picked out a name together, Emma Rose Thompson Martinez, and I would catch Sarah talking to her belly, describing the adventures they would share. "Today we saw the most beautiful sunset from the hospital roof," she would whisper to her growing stomach during her second trimester. "Your daddy was working late again, saving lives. And I wanted to show you how pretty your world is going to be." Sarah documented everything. Weekly photos of her changing body, ultrasound images carefully labeled and dated, lists of baby names in her distinctive handwriting. She read pregnancy books voraciously, attended every parenting class our hospital offered, and started collecting children's books with the same enthusiasm she brought to medical research. But at 28 weeks, complications arose. Sarah developed severe preeclampsia that came on suddenly and aggressively. I was working an overnight shift when she called me at 4 a.m., her voice thick with fear. David, something's wrong. I'm seeing spots and my head is pounding. I think you need to come home. I found her in our bathroom, vomiting violently, her face puffy and pale. Her blood pressure was dangerously high, 180, 120, and she had significant protein in her urine. Despite every intervention our medical training suggested, Emma arrived too early and too small at 28 weeks and 3 days. Emma Rose weighed 2 pounds, 4 ounces. She was perfect. Tiny fingers, delicate features, Sarah's nose, and my dark hair. For 6 beautiful, heartbreaking days, she fought in the NICU while Sarah and I took turns holding her, reading to her, singing lullabies we had practiced for months. Sarah pumped breast milk religiously, determined to give Emma every possible advantage. On her 6th day of life, Emma's tiny heart simply couldn't fight anymore. The monitors went quiet, and Sarah collapsed against my chest, keening with a grief so profound it seemed to echo from somewhere beyond human experience. We held our daughter as she slipped away, and I watched the light dim in Sarah's eyes as our dreams died with our child. Sarah blamed herself despite everyone, colleagues, friends, specialists, assuring her that sometimes medicine has limits, that preeclampsia can be unpredictable and devastating despite the best care. She threw herself into research, reading every paper published about preeclampsia and infant mortality, searching for some explanation or prevention she might have missed. The grief nearly destroyed us both. Sarah couldn't return to pediatrics immediately. Seeing other people's healthy children was too painful. She took a leave of absence and spent weeks in bed, emerging only for Emma's funeral, a small service where we planted a rose bush in the hospital's memorial garden. I continued working, using trauma surgery as an escape from our home filled with unused baby items and shattered dreams. My relationship with my parents, Helen and Robert Martinez, along with my younger sister Carmen, had always been complicated by distance and different priorities. They lived in Sacramento, about 10 hours south, and had never quite understood my choice to move so far away from medical school and then stay in Portland. My father was a high school history teacher who believed success meant staying close to family and building roots in one community. My mother was a retired bank teller who measured accomplishment by traditional milestones: marriage, children, home ownership, in the right neighborhood. Carmen was their golden child, a successful real estate agent who had never left California, married her high school sweetheart Jake, and produced 2 perfect grandchildren for my parents to dote upon. Carmen had always been charming and social, the kind of person who lit up rooms and made friends effortlessly. But there was something calculating beneath her warmth, a tendency to keep mental scorecards of what people owed her. When Sarah and I lost Emma, my family's response was tellingly lukewarm. They sent flowers, a generic arrangement from the grocery store, and called once. My mother's main concern during that brief conversation seemed to be whether this would affect our ability to attend Carmen's upcoming 30th birthday celebration. "These things happen for a reason, David," she said, her voice taking on the tone she used when dispensing unwanted advice. "Maybe it wasn't meant to be. You can always try again when Sarah's feeling better. Life goes on." The casual dismissal of our daughter's death, the suggestion that Emma was somehow replaceable, left me speechless. They didn't visit, didn't offer support, and seemed uncomfortable when I mentioned our grief during subsequent family calls. My father's standard response was to change the subject to sports or weather, while my mother would launch into updates about Carmen's real estate successes or the grandchildren they actually got to see. "You know, David," my mother said during one particularly tone-deaf conversation, "Carmen sold another house this week. Her commission was more than most people make in a year. She's really found her calling. Maybe you should consider coming back to California. There's always demand for doctors here, and you'd be closer to family." The implication that my grief was somehow a lifestyle choice I could remedy by moving closer to them revealed how little they understood about loss, about marriage, about the life Sarah and I had built together. Sarah and I slowly began rebuilding our lives together. She eventually returned to work, but requested a transfer to the NICU where she could work with premature babies and their families. "I want to help other parents going through what we went through," she explained. "Maybe I can make a difference for families like ours." She threw herself into her work with renewed passion, advocating for high-risk pregnancies and supporting other parents facing similar losses. She started a support group at the hospital and wrote articles for medical journals about compassionate care during pregnancy loss. Sarah had always been driven, but after losing Emma, she became almost fierce in her determination to prevent other families from experiencing our pain. I found solace in my emergency room work, finding meaning in helping people through their worst moments. Trauma surgery became my meditation. The intense focus required to save lives pushed away the constant ache of grief, at least temporarily. My colleagues noticed the change in my approach. I became more empathetic with families, better at delivering difficult news, more patient with people in crisis. We started attending a support group for parents who had lost children, meeting other couples navigating similar grief. Some marriages didn't survive the loss. Others, like ours, seemed to be strengthened by facing the worst together. Sarah and I learned to talk about Emma naturally, to celebrate her birthday each year, to include her memory in our vision of the future, rather than trying to move past her. 2 years after losing Emma, we were finally ready to try again. Sarah had worked through much of her guilt and fear with a therapist, and we both felt ready to risk loving another child despite knowing how devastating loss could be. Sarah was 6 months pregnant with our son. We had decided to name him Michael David Thompson Martinez when the fire started. This pregnancy had been different from the first. Sarah was older, more cautious, but also more confident. We had excellent medical care, and all indicators suggested a healthy, full-term delivery. Sarah had continued working until her 7th month, then taken early maternity leave to rest and prepare for Michael's arrival. She spent her days reading, organizing the nursery we had been afraid to prepare too early, and attending prenatal classes. She was glowing with the particular radiance of a woman carrying a wanted child, her belly round and prominent, her movements slower but more purposeful. The night everything changed began normally. I had just finished a grueling 16-hour shift at the hospital. A multi-car accident had kept us busy all day, and arrived home around 11 p.m. to find Sarah reading pregnancy books in bed, one hand absently rubbing her growing belly. She wore one of my old medical school t-shirts, stretched tight over her pregnancy, and her hair was pulled back in a messy bun that somehow made her look both maternal and beautiful. She had made my favorite soup, butternut squash with sage, a recipe she had perfected during residency, and left it warming on the stove, along with a note that read, "For my hero, who saves lives all day. Now let me take care of you. P.S. Michael has been doing gymnastics all evening. I think he's going to be a soccer player like his daddy wanted to be." I had played soccer in college before focusing entirely on pre-med studies, and we had laughed about whether Michael would inherit my athletic coordination or Sarah's complete lack of sports ability. "As long as he's healthy and happy," Sarah always said. "I don't care if he wants to be an athlete or an artist or anything in between." We talked about the nursery plans. We had finally decorated it with the same care we had put into Emma's room, but with more hope and less anxiety. We debated whether Michael would inherit Sarah's artistic talents or my stubborn streak, discussed pediatricians and childcare options for when Sarah returned to work. Sarah was excited about introducing Michael to her NICU colleagues, many of whom had become like family to us over the years. "I want him to grow up knowing that his big sister was real," Sarah said as we settled into bed. "I want him to know about Emma and how much we loved her." We fell asleep with her head on my shoulder and my hand resting on her stomach, where I could feel our son's gentle kicks. Sarah always slept better when I was touching her belly. She said it made her feel like we were both protecting him together. I woke to the acrid smell of smoke and the distant sound of crackling. For a confused moment, I thought I was dreaming. Sometimes the stress of emergency medicine created vivid nightmares. But then I saw the orange glow under our bedroom door and my medical training kicked in. The house was on fire. "Sarah!" I shook her awake, already calculating our escape route. She was slower to wake than usual, pregnancy making her sleep more deeply. "Sarah, we need to get out now. There's a fire." Her eyes snapped open, immediately alert despite having been sound asleep moments before. She struggled to sit up, her pregnant belly making quick movements difficult. "The baby," she said immediately, her hands going to her stomach. "David. The baby." "I know. We're going to get out together. Take my hand." The hallway was filling with smoke, but we could still make it to the front door if we moved quickly. I grabbed Sarah's robe from the chair, helped her into it, and took her hand. We moved as fast as her condition allowed, keeping low as I'd learned in fire safety training. The smoke was thicker than I had expected, and I could hear the fire spreading somewhere below us, consuming the old wood of our craftsman house with frightening speed. But as we reached the living room, a burning beam from the ceiling crashed down directly in front of us, separating Sarah and me by about 8 feet. The fire had spread faster than I had anticipated, and what had been a clear escape route moments before was now blocked by burning debris and spreading flames. "David?" Sarah screamed, and I could see the terror in her eyes through the growing wall of flames between us. She was pressed against the far wall, her hands protectively covering her belly. "The baby! I can't lose another baby!" I tried to reach her, tried to find another way through the burning debris, but the fire was spreading too fast and the heat was becoming unbearable. The structural integrity of the house was compromising rapidly. I could hear beams cracking overhead, see the ceiling beginning to sag ominously. Through the smoke and flames, I could see Sarah backing toward the rear of the house, toward what I prayed was still a clear exit. We had always planned that if there was ever a fire, we would have multiple escape routes. The back door led to our small patio, then to the alley where the fire department could easily reach us. "Go out the back!" I yelled, my voice hoarse from the smoke. The kitchen door. I'll meet you outside. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face, one hand pressed to her mouth against the smoke, the other still protectively cradling her belly. I love you, she called back. I love you too. Go! Now! Those were the last words we ever spoke to each other. I made it out the front just as the first fire truck arrived. The sound of sirens had never been more welcome, but also terrifying because it confirmed that this was really happening, that our home was burning down with my pregnant wife still inside. My wife! I screamed at the first firefighter I reached, Captain Morrison, a veteran I recognized from the hospital where we sometimes treated injured firefighters. She's pregnant! 6 months! She went out the back! Captain Morrison's expression immediately shifted to high alert. Where in the house? She was heading toward the kitchen. The back door. Please, you have to get her out. I tried to run around to the back of the house, but the firefighters held me back as I heard a terrible groaning sound, the roof beginning to collapse. The house was old, and despite our best maintenance efforts, it was succumbing to the fire with terrifying speed. Captain Morrison and his crew risked their lives trying to reach the back of the house where Sarah would have headed, but the structure was too compromised. They made it to the back door, but it was blocked by burning debris from inside. The kitchen window was their next target, but as they prepared to break through, we all heard it, a sound that still haunts my nightmares, the house collapsing inward with a roar that seemed to shake the entire neighborhood. No! I fought the paramedics who were trying to restrain me, desperate to run into the burning wreckage. Sarah! Sarah! They sedated me as I screamed my wife's name, clawing at anyone who tried to hold me back. The last thing I remembered was Captain Morrison's soot-covered face, his eyes filled with the kind of professional compassion that comes with delivering the worst possible news to families. I woke up in the burn unit at OHSU, the same hospital where Sarah and I had met, where we had worked together, where we had lost Emma and hoped for Michael. The irony was cruel. Being treated in the place where we had built our life together, where Sarah had fought so hard to save other people's children. My injuries were severe, but not immediately life-threatening. Second and third degree burns covered 30% of my body, primarily my arms, chest, and the left side of my face. The pain was indescribable, like being stabbed with hot knives repeatedly. But the physical agony was nothing compared to what I felt when Dr. Rebecca Walsh, the burn unit director, sat beside my bed and explained what they had found in the wreckage. David, she said gently, her voice the same tone Sarah had used when delivering difficult news to families. I'm so sorry. They found Sarah's body this morning. The words hit me like another collapse, like the roof caving in on whatever was left of my heart. The baby? I whispered, though I already knew. I'm so sorry. Neither of them survived. They found Sarah's body 2 days after the fire, not in the kitchen where she should have been, but in what remained of our bedroom. The medical examiner explained that she had likely become disoriented by the smoke, that carbon monoxide can cause confusion and poor decision-making. Instead of continuing toward the back door, she had apparently turned back, possibly trying to reach me or collect something important to her. The medical examiner was kind when he explained the details. Sarah and the baby had died from smoke inhalation before the structural collapse, meaning they wouldn't have suffered through the fire itself. It would have been like falling asleep, he said gently. No pain, no awareness of what was happening. I clung to that small mercy, even as it felt like my heart was being ripped from my chest. Sarah, who had been so careful throughout her pregnancy, who had followed every safety protocol and medical recommendation, who had already lost one child and was so close to safely delivering our son, gone in a matter of minutes. Fire investigators determined that faulty electrical wiring in the basement had sparked the blaze. The house was old, and despite our best maintenance efforts, some risks couldn't be eliminated. The electrical system had been updated in the 1980s, but not to current standards. A single wire, gradually degrading over decades, had finally failed at the worst possible moment. The fire chief explained it to me in clinical terms that my medical background helped me understand, but couldn't help me accept. Electrical fires can smolder for hours before bursting into flames, he said. By the time you smelled smoke, the fire had already compromised the house's structure. There was probably nothing you could have done differently. No one was at fault, which somehow made the loss even harder to bear. There was no drunk driver to blame, no negligent contractor to sue, no justice to seek, just the random cruelty of a universe that could take everything in a single night. It was an accident in the purest, most devastating sense of the word. While I was still in the hospital, my friend and colleague, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, no relation to the burn unit director, called my parents to inform them of what had happened. Jennifer was one of Sarah's closest friends from residency, an emergency physician who understood trauma both professionally and personally. I was in too much physical and emotional pain to make the call myself, and I assumed my parents would immediately make the 10-hour drive to be with me. Jennifer later told me about the conversation, her voice tight with disbelief and anger. I called your mother and explained that you were in the burn unit, that Sarah and the baby had died in a house fire, Jennifer said. I expected shock, immediate concern for you, questions about what they could do to help. What did she say? I asked, though part of me already knew it wouldn't be what I needed to hear. She said, and I quote, "This is terrible timing. Carmen's wedding is in 2 weeks, and we're right in the middle of final preparations. The venue, the catering, the flowers, everything would be ruined if we left now. Can David manage until after the wedding?" Jennifer was so shocked she thought she had misunderstood. She explained again that I was in critical condition, that my wife and unborn child had died, that I needed family support immediately, not in 2 weeks. Your mother's response was to ask if the wedding could somehow be postponed, but then she immediately backtracked, saying that would be unfair to Carmen and Jake, who had spent 2 years planning their dream wedding. She actually said, "Carmen only gets married once. We can visit David anytime." When I called my parents from the hospital 3 days later, my voice still hoarse from smoke inhalation and my hands shaking from pain medication, my mother's first words weren't about my condition or expressing sympathy for my loss. "David, honey, we're so sorry about Sarah and the baby," she said, her tone rushed and distracted, as if she was multitasking during our conversation. "This is just such terrible timing. Carmen's wedding is this Saturday, and I'm the mother of the bride. The rehearsal dinner is tomorrow night, and I'm giving a speech. Everyone would be devastated if we weren't there." I held the phone in my bandaged hand, trying to process what I was hearing. My wife was dead. My son was dead. I was lying in a burn unit, looking like something from a horror movie, and my parents were prioritizing a wedding celebration. "Mom," I whispered, my throat raw from the breathing tube I'd had during emergency surgery. "I need you. I don't know how to do this alone. Sarah's gone. The baby's gone. I can't even feed myself." "Of course you do, sweetheart. You're a doctor. You're strong. You've always been independent, and Sarah wouldn't want you to fall apart. She'd want you to be brave and move forward." The casual invocation of my dead wife's wishes by someone who had barely known her was infuriating. Sarah had been many things, but she wouldn't have wanted me to face this alone while my family celebrated someone else's happiness. "The wedding is one day, Mom. I'm your son, and I need you now." "David, you're being unreasonable. Carmen has been planning this wedding for 2 years. She's already stressed about everything being perfect. If we leave now, it will ruin the most important day of her life. After the wedding, after everyone goes home and things settle down, we'll plan a visit. Maybe in a month or so when you're feeling better." The line went dead, and I lay in that sterile hospital room, staring at the ceiling, realizing that the family I thought I could count on had just abandoned me in my darkest hour. The physical pain of my burns was excruciating, but the emotional pain of that rejection was somehow worse. My sister Carmen called later that evening, her voice bright with wedding excitement and completely tone-deaf to my situation. "David, I heard about Sarah. That's so awful, and I'm really sorry. But Mom says you're going to be fine, right? You'll still send a wedding gift, won't you? I know you can't make it because of the hospital thing, but Jake and I registered at Williams-Sonoma and Pottery Barn. We really need the good china set. It's $800, but it would mean so much to us." The hospital thing. As if I were recovering from a minor procedure rather than mourning the loss of my family while healing from burns that covered nearly a third of my body. "Carmen," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "my wife is dead. My baby is dead. I'm in intensive care." "I know, and that's terrible. But life goes on, right? That's what Mom always says. You can't let bad things stop you from celebrating good things. The wedding is going to be amazing. We're having it at the Ritz-Carlton with a full orchestra. I wish you could be there to see how beautiful everything looks." I hung up without responding, unable to comprehend how anyone could be so callous, so completely lacking in empathy. Dr. Jennifer Walsh became my lifeline during those dark weeks in the hospital. She visited daily, sometimes just sitting quietly while I slept, other times bringing me books and music when I was alert enough to appreciate them. She helped coordinate with the insurance companies and lawyers who needed my attention, served as a buffer between me and the constant stream of medical decisions that had to be made. "Sarah would want you to fight," she reminded me gently during one of my darkest moments when I told her I didn't see the point in continuing. "She'd want you to heal and find a way to honor her memory and Michael's." Jennifer also connected me with a support group for burn survivors and helped me understand the long road of recovery ahead. She brought me photos from Sarah's memorial service, a gathering of her colleagues and friends that my parents had been too busy to attend. Hundreds of people came to honor Sarah's life and work, sharing stories of how she had touched their lives and the lives of their patients. She was loved, Jennifer told me, showing me pictures of the overflowing chapel, the flowers, the colleagues who spoke about Sarah's dedication to her young patients. She made a difference in this world, and people wanted to celebrate that. The physical healing progressed slowly and painfully. Burn injuries require constant care, wound cleaning, debridement procedures, skin grafts, physical therapy to prevent contractures and maintain range of motion. Each day brought new procedures, new pain, new challenges to overcome. I had multiple surgeries to repair the damage, plastic surgery to minimize scarring, occupational therapy to regain function in my hands and arms. The left side of my face bore the most visible damage, skin grafts that never quite matched my natural coloring, scarring that pulled at my eye and mouth, areas where hair would never grow again. I avoided mirrors for weeks, not ready to see how fundamentally I had changed. After 6 weeks in various hospital units, I was finally cleared to return home. But there was no home to return to. The house was a total loss, reduced to a foundation and memories. Insurance would cover rebuilding, but I couldn't imagine ever wanting to live on that site again. Couldn't bear the thought of walking past the spot where Sarah had died. Instead, I rented a small apartment in Northwest Portland, furnished with donations from medical colleagues who had rallied to support me. The apartment was generic and soulless, the opposite of the warm, personality-filled home Sarah and I had created together. But it was temporary shelter while I figured out how to rebuild a life I no longer wanted. The insurance settlement process was complex, but ultimately generous. Our homeowner's insurance covered the house and contents, but there were additional claims related to the electrical system's failure. The contractor who had updated the wiring in the 1980s was still in business, and their insurance provided additional compensation. The electrical component manufacturer had faced similar claims in other cases, leading to a class action settlement that provided further funds. Most significantly, Sarah's life insurance policy was substantial. We had increased our coverage when she became pregnant with Emma. Then, again, when she was expecting Michael. The policy was designed to provide for our growing family, to ensure that whoever survived would have the resources to maintain our lifestyle and care for our children. Combined with the wrongful death settlement from the electrical contractor's negligence, the total amount was more than I had ever imagined having. My attorney, Robert Chen, explained that such settlements were designed not just to replace what was lost, but to account for the lifetime of love, companionship, and financial contribution that Sarah and our unborn son would have provided. The money can't replace your family, Robert said gently during one of our meetings. But it can ensure you have the resources you need to rebuild your life and honor their memory however you choose. I had no idea what to do with such wealth. Money felt meaningless when it came at the cost of everyone I loved. I considered donating it all to pediatric hospitals or burn treatment centers, but Robert advised setting aside funds for my own long-term care first. Burn injuries often led to complications later in life, increased cancer risk, joint problems, ongoing surgical needs, and I might need resources I couldn't yet imagine. 3 months after the fire, during a routine follow-up call with my parents, I briefly mentioned the insurance settlement. I wasn't looking for sympathy or support anymore. I had learned not to expect it, but I thought they should know that I was financially stable despite the medical costs and loss of income. "That's wonderful news, David," my mother responded, though her tone suggested she was only half listening. "Carmen and Jake are house hunting now that they're back from their honeymoon. The wedding was absolutely beautiful, by the way. I'll send you photos when I have time to organize them." The wedding I had been too busy being hospitalized for burns to attend. The wedding that had been more important than supporting their son through the worst tragedy of his life. "How much was the settlement, if you don't mind me asking?" My father's voice joined the call, suddenly more engaged than he had been during our entire conversation. When I mentioned the figure, even a rough estimate, the line went quiet for several long seconds. That's quite substantial," my mother finally said, her voice taking on a different quality entirely. "Well, I'm sure you'll be wise with it. Family money should benefit family after all. That's what we've always believed." I didn't understand the full implication at the time, focused as I was on my physical therapy and grief counseling, but 6 months later, that comment would make perfect, horrible sense. My recovery progressed slowly but steadily through the fall and winter. The physical therapy was excruciating, working to restore flexibility and function to skin and muscles damaged by the fire. Scar tissue is inflexible and tight, and without constant stretching and movement, burn victims can lose range of motion permanently. I had multiple surgeries to improve the appearance and function of my scars, procedures to release contractures, additional skin grafts to improve cosmetic appearance, laser treatments to reduce scarring. I would never look the same as before, but gradually I began to resemble something closer to my former self. More challenging was the psychological recovery. I couldn't drive past the site of our former home without panic attacks. The smell of smoke, from barbecues, fireplaces, even cigarettes, would send me into flashbacks so vivid I could hear Sarah calling my name, could feel the heat of the flames, could taste the acrid smoke that had filled our hallway that night. I slept with lights on because darkness reminded me of that smoke-filled hallway, of stumbling through our home trying to reach Sarah. I started at sudden noises, Convinced I was hearing the sound of structural collapse, I avoided social gatherings because people inevitably asked about my scars, forcing me to relive the worst night of my life for strangers' curiosity. Dr. Amanda Foster, my therapist, specialized in trauma recovery and grief counseling. She helped me work through survivor's guilt, the horrible question of why I had lived when Sarah and Michael had died, and the complex grief of losing not just my wife, but our unborn child and the future we had planned together. Trauma often reveals people's true character, she explained during one of our sessions when I was struggling with my family's abandonment. Crisis situations strip away social pretenses and show who people really are underneath. Your parents' behavior tells you something important about their capacity for empathy and unconditional love. But they're my parents, I protested. Shouldn't that mean something? Being a parent is about more than biology, Dr. Harriet Foster said gently. It's about showing up when your child needs you, regardless of the circumstances. Some people are capable of that kind of love, and some aren't. That's painful to accept, but it's important information about who you can count on in your life. I threw myself into my work, returning to the emergency room 6 months after the fire. My colleagues were incredibly supportive, adjusting my schedule to accommodate therapy appointments and medical follow-ups, never making me feel like a burden or liability. Some patients initially reacted with shock to my visible scars, but I found that my experience with trauma actually made me a more empathetic physician. I understood what it felt like to be afraid, to face mortality, to lose everything that mattered. When I sat with families in crisis, when I delivered bad news or held someone's hand during the worst moments of their life, I could offer authentic comfort rather than clinical sympathy. My scars became a badge of survival rather than something to hide. 8 months after the fire, I established the Sarah and Emma Foundation, a nonprofit providing support to families dealing with pregnancy loss, infant death, and burn trauma recovery. It felt like a meaningful way to honor their memory and channel my pain into something constructive. The foundation offered counseling services, support groups, financial assistance for medical expenses related to high-risk pregnancies, and specialized support for burn survivors and their families. We partnered with OHSU's burn unit to provide peer counseling, connecting newly injured patients with survivors who could offer hope and practical advice. Sarah had always wanted to make a difference in the world, to help families navigate medical crises with compassion and dignity. The foundation became her legacy, a way to extend her caring nature beyond her own life. We funded research into pregnancy complications, supported families who couldn't afford funeral expenses for lost children, and provided emergency grants for burn survivors facing financial hardship during their recovery. I was working late at the foundation office one evening in November when my phone rang with my parents' number. I hadn't spoken to them since that brief call about the settlement, though Carmen occasionally sent family photos via email that I deleted without opening. David, my mother's voice was unusually warm and engaged, a stark contrast to the distracted tone she had used during our previous conversations. "How are you doing, son? We've been thinking about you so much." The sudden interest caught me off guard after months of minimal contact. "I'm managing," I replied cautiously. "The foundation is keeping me busy. We're helping a lot of families." "That's wonderful that you're able to help other people," my mother gushed. "Sarah would be so proud of the man you've become, using your experience to serve others." The mention of Sarah's pride by someone who had barely known her and hadn't bothered to attend her memorial service felt particularly hollow. "Your father and I have been talking," my mother continued, "and we think it's time for a family visit. We'd love to see how you're doing and spend some real time together. It's been far too long." After months of treating me like an inconvenience, their sudden desire for a family reunion seemed suspicious. "That would be nice," I said carefully. "When were you thinking?" "Well, we could drive up this weekend if that works for you. Carmen and Jake could come too. Make it a real family gathering. We have some things we'd like to discuss with you. Family matters that are better handled in person." The phrase "family matters" triggered an immediate sense of unease. In my family, that phrase was never followed by good news. It usually preceded requests for money, demands for support of Carmen's latest venture, or guilt trips about my distance from the family. "What kind of things?" I asked. "Oh, just family business, financial planning, that sort of thing. It's better discussed in person, don't you think? We'll see you Saturday afternoon?" I agreed, though every instinct told me this sudden family interest was motivated by something other than concern for my well-being. Saturday arrived with typical Pacific Northwest winter weather, cold rain that seemed to seep into everything, and gray skies that matched my mood. I spent the morning cleaning my small apartment and buying groceries for lunch, trying to prepare for what felt like an approaching storm. My parents arrived at 2 p.m. sharp, carrying overnight bags that suggested they planned to stay longer than a simple visit. They looked older than I remembered. My father's hair had gone completely gray, and my mother had gained weight and developed deep lines around her eyes. They seemed nervous, exchanging glances and speaking in the overly cheerful tones people use when they're trying to hide their real agenda. Carmen and Jake followed 20 minutes later in a brand new BMW X5 with temporary plates. Carmen looked different. Her hair was professionally highlighted and styled, she wore expensive clothing I didn't recognize, and her engagement ring had been upgraded to something significantly larger than what I remembered from their engagement photos 2 years earlier. "David!" Carmen exclaimed, giving me an air hug that barely made contact. Her eyes swept over my scars with barely concealed shock, though she tried to cover her reaction with an overly bright smile. "You look so much better than I expected. The doctors did amazing work." My mother's reaction to my appearance was more subtle, but equally revealing. A slight tightening around her eyes as she took in the permanent changes to my face, followed by an overly bright smile. "The healing is remarkable," she said, as if I had chosen to undergo cosmetic surgery rather than survived life-threatening injuries. "You can barely tell anything happened." This was obviously untrue. My scars were clearly visible, and the left side of my face still showed significant grafting and contracture. But I appreciated the attempt at kindness, even if it was misguided. Jake seemed genuinely uncomfortable with the entire situation, offering a sincere handshake and condolences that felt more authentic than anything else I'd heard from my family. "I'm really sorry about Sarah and the baby, man. I can't imagine what you've been through." We made small talk over lunch, with my family sharing updates about Carmen's success at her new job with a luxury real estate firm specializing in million-dollar properties, Jake's promotion to regional sales manager for a medical device company, and their ongoing house hunt in Sacramento's most exclusive neighborhoods. "We're looking at a place in the fabulous 40s, Carmen said excitedly, and describing a neighborhood I knew was well beyond what a real estate agent and sales manager should reasonably afford. 5 bedrooms, gourmet kitchen, pool, 3-car garage. It's exactly what we need for when we start having children." She placed her hand on her stomach in a gesture that suggested pregnancy, though she hadn't mentioned being expecting. The house she described would easily cost over $1 million, far more than their combined salaries should support. "Business has been incredible," Carmen continued. "I sold 3 houses last month alone. The commissions in luxury real estate are amazing, sometimes more than most people make in a year. And Jake's company just expanded into the Northwest," my mother added proudly. "They're considering relocating him to manage the entire West Coast region. The salary increase would be substantial." Their lifestyle had clearly upgraded significantly since the wedding 8 months earlier, though the timeline for such dramatic financial improvement seemed suspiciously coincidental with my settlement. "So," my father said as we finished eating, his tone becoming more serious, "we want to talk to you about your situation, David. Your mother and I have been thinking about family financial planning, and we have some ideas that might benefit everyone." Here it comes, I thought. "The settlement you received," my mother continued, leaning forward with the earnest expression she used when she wanted to appear deeply concerned. "It's more than any single person needs, especially someone without dependents or major expenses. Family money should benefit the whole family, don't you think?" I set down my coffee cup carefully, trying to control my reaction. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Carmen couldn't contain her excitement any longer. "Jake and I have found the perfect house. It's in the best neighborhood in Sacramento, walking distance to the country club where all the important clients live. The networking opportunities alone would pay for themselves." She pulled out her phone and showed me photos of an enormous Mediterranean-style mansion with manicured grounds and a swimming pool. "It's $1.2 million, but it's an investment in our future. With my real estate career taking off, we need to live somewhere that reflects our success." "And your mother and I aren't getting any younger," my father added, his voice taking on the martyred tone he used when discussing money. "We need to think about retirement planning. We've been looking at a vacation property in Palm Springs where the whole family could gather, a place for healing and making new memories." "What we're proposing," my mother said, with the tone of someone announcing a generous gift rather than making a demand, "is that you share the settlement with the family. It only makes sense, half for you, half for the rest of us. It would help all of us move forward from this tragedy." The audacity was breathtaking, yet somehow exactly what I should have expected from people who had prioritized a wedding over their son's crisis. They had ignored me during the worst period of my life, then suddenly reappeared when money became available. "And what about Sarah and the baby?" I asked quietly. "This money represents their lives, their lost future. How do they fit into your family financial planning?" Carmen waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away an annoying insect. "David, you have to move on eventually. Grief isn't healthy when it goes on too long. Sarah wouldn't want you holding on to sadness forever. She'd want the family to be taken care of, to be successful and happy." The presumption of speaking for my dead wife, by someone who had met her perhaps 5 times and never bothered to get to know her, ignited something dangerous in my chest. Really? And how exactly would you know what Sarah would want? You never called her on her birthday, never visited us in Portland, barely acknowledged her existence when she was alive. There's no need to be hostile, my mother said coolly, her warmth disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. We're trying to help you think rationally about your future. Grief can cloud judgment, make people make poor decisions. Poor decisions like what? I asked. Like isolating yourself, like refusing family support, like wasting money on charity when you could be helping the people who raised you, who love you unconditionally. The phrase unconditional love from people who had conditions for everything, including showing up during family emergencies, was particularly rich. Jake shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly aware that the conversation had taken an ugly turn. Maybe we should talk about this later, he suggested quietly. No, Carmen said firmly. We drove 10 hours to have this conversation. David needs to understand that family supports family. We supported him growing up, paid for his education, gave him every advantage. Now it's time for some reciprocity. We never asked for anything when you were in medical school. Back, my father added. Never complained about the money we spent on your books, your application fees, helping you get established. Family invests in family. I stood up abruptly. Excuse me for a moment. I went to my bedroom and retrieved a small photo album I kept on my nightstand. It contained pictures from my life with Sarah, our wedding, vacations, holidays, quiet moments at home. But I had also added photos from the night of the fire, images the insurance company and fire department had taken for their investigations. I had kept them not out of morbidity, but as a reminder of what I had lost, what no amount of money could replace. When I returned to the living room, my family was huddled in quiet conversation that stopped immediately when I appeared. Carmen was showing Jake something on her phone, more photos of the house they wanted to buy with my wife's life insurance money. Before we discuss dividing money, I said, sitting back down and placing the photo album on the coffee table, I want to make sure you understand exactly what that settlement represents. I opened the album to a photo taken by the fire department photographer the morning after the fire. It showed what remained of our bedroom, charred beams, melted metal, unrecognizable debris that had once been our furniture, our clothes, our life together. In the center of the frame, partially obscured by rubble, was the outline of where Sarah's body had been found. My mother gasped and looked away immediately. My father's face drained of color. Carmen covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes wide with shock. Jake pushed back from the table, clearly disturbed by what he was seeing. This is where they found her, I said, my voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. This is what 50% of your family money represents. Sarah burned to death in this room while you were worried about wedding centerpieces. I turned the page to another fire department photo, this one showing the nursery we had prepared for Michael. The crib was twisted metal, the changing table reduced to ash, the watercolor paintings Sarah had made completely destroyed. And this is where our son died, I continued. 6 months in the womb, never got to take his first breath. This is the other part of your investment opportunity. Carmen had gone pale, her earlier enthusiasm completely deflated. David, we didn't realize. Didn't realize what? That people actually died? That the money came from real tragedy, real loss? I turned to another page, a photo of myself taken in the hospital, my face and arms wrapped in bandages, connected to monitoring equipment and IV lines, barely recognizable as human. And this is what I was dealing with while you were helping Jake pick out wedding favors, I said. 2nd and 3rd degree burns over 30% of my body, skin grafts, months of surgery, learning to use my hands again. Jake was the first to speak, his voice quiet and ashamed. Jesus, David, we had no idea it was this bad. The photos in the news, they didn't show. Because I asked the hospital to limit media access, I replied. I didn't want my personal tragedy turned into entertainment. My parents sat in stunned silence, finally confronting the reality they had been avoiding for months. The photos forced them to see what they had chosen to ignore, that while they were celebrating Carmen's wedding, their son had been fighting for his life and mourning losses that would define the rest of his existence. The settlement money, I said, closing the album, will be used exactly as it was intended, to honor Sarah and Michael's memory, and to help other families dealing with similar tragedies. Every penny represents a life lost, a future destroyed, a love that will never be replaced. I stood, indicating that our conversation was ending. The Sarah and Emma Foundation has helped dozens of families already. We've funded research into fire safety, provided counseling for burn survivors, supported families dealing with pregnancy loss. That's what the money is for, not luxury houses and vacation properties. My mother's shock was transforming into indignation, her true nature reasserting itself now that the initial impact of the photos had worn off. Now listen here, David. We are your family. We raised you, supported your education, gave you opportunities. We deserve consideration and respect. Respect is earned, I replied quietly. And you haven't earned it. If you want to be part of my family, truly part of my family, then you show up when it matters. You offer support without conditions. You honor the people I loved instead of treating their deaths like a business opportunity. Carmen finally found her voice, though it was shakier than before. We didn't know how to help. We didn't know what to say or do. Mom said you were strong, that you'd be okay. You could have started by showing up, I said simply. You could have sat in that hospital room with me. You could have helped me plan Sarah's memorial service instead of worrying about your seating arrangements. You could have treated my grief as more important than your celebration. But Carmen's wedding was planned for 2 years, my mother protested weakly. We couldn't just cancel everything. Think of all the people who would have been disappointed. What about me? What about my disappointment when the people who were supposed to love me most chose a party over being there when I needed them? The room fell silent, except for the sound of rain against the windows. My family sat there, finally forced to confront their choices, their priorities, their fundamental failure as human beings. I walked to the door and opened it. I'd like you to leave now. When you're ready to be family without expecting financial rewards, when you're ready to support me without conditions, when you can acknowledge that Sarah and Michael's lives mattered more than your material wants, you can call. Until then, we have nothing to discuss. My parents gathered their coats in stiff silence. Carmen looked like she wanted to say something, but seemed to think better of it. Jake lingered for a moment, offering another sincere apology that I appreciated, but couldn't fully accept. As they reached their cars, my mother turned back, her face twisted with the kind of anger that comes when someone's true nature is exposed. You'll regret this decision, David. When you realize how alone you are, when you need family support, when the grief becomes too much to handle by yourself, you'll wish you hadn't been so stubborn and selfish. I'm not alone, I replied quietly. I have friends who show up without being asked. I have colleagues who support me without expecting payment. I have families through the foundation who understand real loss and real love. That's more family than I need. I watched them drive away in the rain, Carmen's BMW splashing through puddles as they fled back to their world of surface-level concerns and conditional affection. As their taillights disappeared, I felt a complex mixture of grief and relief wash over me. I had lost my parents and sister, but in truth, I suspected they had never really been the family I thought they were. Their love had always come with strings attached, conditions that became clear only when tested by real crisis. That night, I sat in my apartment looking through the photo album again, but this time I focused on the pictures of Sarah and me during happier times. Our wedding day, hiking trips in the Cascades, quiet moments at home, her hands resting on her pregnant belly during those precious months when we thought we would finally have the family we dreamed of. The money from the settlement would never bring them back, but it could honor their memory in meaningful ways. Through the foundation, Sarah's compassion continued to help families in crisis. Her dream of making the world better for children lived on in the research we funded, the support groups we facilitated, the emergency assistance we provided to families facing impossible choices. 1 year later, I stood in the memorial garden I had created behind the new Sarah and Emma Foundation building. The garden was beautiful. Sarah's favorite flowers bloomed in careful arrangements around a small stone bench where families could sit and remember their own losses. A fountain provided peaceful sounds, and pathways wound through plantings designed to bloom in different seasons, ensuring year-round beauty. The foundation had grown beyond my initial vision, serving hundreds of families dealing with pregnancy loss, infant death, fire trauma, and burn recovery. We had partnered with hospitals across the Pacific Northwest, trained counselors in trauma-informed care, and established scholarship programs for medical students interested in emergency medicine and pediatrics. My physical recovery had progressed as well as doctors had hoped. The scars would always be visible, but they had become part of who I was, rather than something I tried to hide. Some patients found them comforting, evidence that their doctor understood trauma from personal experience. I had learned to see them not as disfigurement, but as proof of survival, evidence that the human body and spirit could endure unimaginable damage and still heal. Foster had helped me work through the layers of grief, not just for Sarah and Michael, but for the family relationships I had thought existed, but had been revealed as illusions built on convenience rather than genuine love. Healing, she reminded me during one of our sessions, doesn't mean forgetting or pretending things didn't hurt. It means integrating those experiences into who you're becoming, using them to build something meaningful. I was slowly beginning to consider the possibility of loving someone again. Dr. Amanda Chen, a pediatric surgeon who volunteered with the foundation, had become a close friend. We shared similar backgrounds. Both had experienced profound loss. Both were dedicated to helping others heal. Our friendship was careful and respectful of my grief, but I could feel something deeper developing between us. Sarah would want you to be happy, Amanda said one evening as we walked through the memorial garden together. She'd want you to love again, to build a new kind of family. It was terrifying and wonderful and guilt-making all at once, But I was learning that the heart has more capacity than I had ever imagined. Loving someone new didn't diminish my love for Sarah. It expanded it, proved that love could multiply rather than divide. My parents had called twice since our confrontation, once when they learned through mutual acquaintances about the foundation's success and the recognition it had received in medical journals, and again when Carmen's marriage to Jake ended in divorce 6 months later. Both calls were transparent attempts to re-establish contact now that my work had gained prestige and Carmen needed financial support. The calls lasted less than 5 minutes each. I was polite but distant, making clear that their sudden interest in reconciliation felt opportunistic rather than genuine. They had revealed their true selves in my moment of greatest need, and I had no interest in pretending otherwise. Carmen had sent a card on the anniversary of Sarah's death with a generic message about thinking of me during difficult times. There was no mention of her previous behavior, no acknowledgement of what had transpired, no genuine apology for treating my tragedy as a business opportunity. It felt like checking a box rather than expressing genuine sympathy. I didn't respond to any of these overtures. They had shown me who they really were when it mattered most, and I believed them. Instead, I focused on building the kind of family that actually mattered. The chosen family of friends, colleagues, and fellow survivors who showed up consistently, who supported without expecting rewards, who understood that love is demonstrated through actions rather than words. Dr. Jennifer Walsh became like an older sister to me, checking in regularly, celebrating foundation milestones, offering guidance when I faced difficult decisions. Marcus Chen, my former best man, drove up from San Francisco monthly to have dinner and catch up. The burn survivors I had met through support groups became an extended network of people who understood recovery from trauma in ways biological family never could. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, an elderly woman whose grandson had been one of Sarah's patients, became a volunteer coordinator for the foundation and something of a surrogate grandmother to me. She had lost her own son in Vietnam and understood that grief never fully goes away. It just learns to coexist with joy, purpose, and new love. Family isn't just who you're born to, she told me one day, as we organized memorial service programs. It's who chooses to walk alongside you through the valleys and celebrate with you on the mountaintops. Blood doesn't make family, loyalty does. On the second anniversary of the fire, I hosted a memorial service for Sarah and Michael at the foundation. Dr. Jennifer Walsh spoke about Sarah's dedication to her young patients and her innovative approaches to family-centered care. Burn survivors I had met through support groups shared how my story had helped them process their own trauma and find meaning in their suffering. Families who had been helped by the foundation expressed gratitude for the resources and community we provided during their darkest times. A teenage girl who had survived a car fire 2 years earlier read a poem she had written about healing. Parents who had lost children during pregnancy spoke about the support groups that had helped them navigate their grief. As the service concluded and people gathered in small groups to share stories and support each other, I realized that this was what family looked like. Not the people who shared my DNA, but had abandoned me when it mattered. But the people who had chosen to walk alongside me through grief and healing, who celebrated my victories and supported me through setbacks. Dr. Amanda Chen found me as the evening wound down, offering a gentle smile and a warm presence that had become increasingly important to me. "Sarah would be so proud," she said softly. "Look at all the lives you're touching in her honor." "We're touching," I corrected gently. "This isn't something I could do alone." She squeezed my hand, and I felt the familiar flutter of possibility, of hope for a future I had thought was impossible. We stood together in the memorial garden, surrounded by flowers that bloomed in Sarah's memory, supported by people who had chosen to be family when biology had failed. That evening, as I locked up the foundation building and prepared to drive home, I found a small envelope tucked under my windshield wiper. Inside was a photo I had never seen before. Sarah holding a premature baby in the NICU, her face radiant with the kind of joy that comes from helping families during their most vulnerable moments. On the back, someone had written, "Dr. Sarah saved our daughter's life when she was born at 26 weeks. Emma is now 3 years old and healthy because of your wife's skill and compassion. Thank you for continuing her work through the foundation." I sat in my car in the empty parking lot, holding that photo and crying tears that were equal parts grief and gratitude. Sarah was gone. Michael was gone. The future we had planned was gone. But love, I had learned, doesn't die with the people we lose. It transforms, extends, finds new ways to touch the world. 3 years after that terrible night, I had built a life I never could have imagined. Scarred but purposeful, lonely sometimes but not empty, focused on healing rather than just surviving. I had learned that family isn't determined by blood or obligation, but by who shows up when the world is burning down around you. The foundation had become Sarah's living legacy, her compassion extended through programs that touched hundreds of families each year. Through our work, she continued to save lives, comfort grieving parents, and advocate for the most vulnerable patients. Michael's memory lived on in the scholarships we provided to medical students and the research we funded into pregnancy complications. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very intentional about building the life you want, rather than accepting the life you were given, you get the chance to show up for others when their worlds are falling apart, to be the family they need when the family they were born into fails them. That, I realized, might be the most meaningful way to honor the love Sarah and I had shared, by extending it to others who needed it most, by creating the kind of family that shows up without conditions, supports without expecting rewards, and loves without limits. As I drove home through the Portland streets Sarah and I had once explored together, I felt her presence not as a ghost haunting my past, but as a guiding spirit blessing my future. The money from her death had become a force for healing. The tragedy of our loss transformed into hope for countless other families. My biological family had shown me that shared DNA means nothing without shared values, without genuine care, without the willingness to sacrifice for someone you love. But my chosen family had shown me that love can be built rather than inherited, that loyalty can be cultivated rather than assumed, that the deepest bonds are formed through conscious choice rather than biological accident. 3 years later, I was finally ready to believe that the best way to honor the dead is not to join them in sorrow, but to live fully in their memory, to love boldly despite the risk of loss, to build something beautiful from the ashes of what was destroyed. And when people ask me now how I define family after experiencing such profound loss and betrayal, I tell them this: family is who shows up. Family is who stays. Family is who loves you, not despite your broken places, but because of them. Knowing that shared scars create the strongest bonds of all. How do you define family after experiencing such profound loss and betrayal? How do you rebuild when the people who should have supported you instead saw your tragedy as an opportunity? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if David's journey from grief to purpose inspired you, hit that like button.